Bonjour, c'est tellement excellent de vous voir. C'est excellent d'être ici après une été et j'espère que vous avez eu une excellente été. Et aujourd'hui, la Chambre reprend ses travaux après plus d'une semaine de deuil national suite au décès de Sa Majesté la Reine Élisabeth II. Cette semaine a été marquée par la tristesse et je suis heureux que les députés ont eu l'occasion de rendre hommage à la reine jeudi et vendredi dernier et rend le propre hommage. C'était un exemple de la Chambre à son meilleur, respectueuse, civile et responsable. Aujourd'hui, la Chambre reprend ses activités normales avec les séances d'automne. And it's a time of great challenge globally, and Canadians are feeling that. We have the war in Ukraine. We're up against global headwinds dealing with inflation. We have the pressures of climate change. It is a time when we're all called to the hour to serve at our highest and our best, offering real and concrete solutions to improve the lives of Canadians and to offer stability. You heard the Prime Minister last week talk about the measures that we're going to be taking with respect to affordability. We'll be moving forward today with those details. You'll be hearing from ministers on what our plans are to take action on affordability. And it's important that those plans be rooted in reality. This is not a time for parlor tricks. This is not a time for shell games. This is a time for real solutions. I'm glad to see that the Conservatives have moved their cryptocurrency legislation, which was scheduled for this week, back. I hope they consider it generally. I know that the new leader has talked a lot about cryptocurrencies, but as the Prime Minister pointed out, this is not a real solution. And the Canadians who would have followed the new leader's advice in that regard would have seen their savings wiped out. These are truly historic and challenging times globally. So we have to be responsible in what we're putting in the window to Canadians and honest to them, with them about both the challenges we face and the solutions. And I think the reality is that Canada is doing exceptionally well, but many people globally, when you take a look at other nations, but that doesn't mean that people aren't finding it very hard to pay the bills and to continue to meet their obligations. And we hear that and are going to do everything we can legislatively and as a government to take action. We have 11 weeks in which to get done enormously serious work. This has been a parliament that I think at times has worked exceptionally well. I've been very encouraged in the ability of a minority government to be able to work across the aisle to get things done. This was true of the Conservatives at the very beginning. It hadn't been true of the Conservatives over the most recent period. But it is my hope, given the hour we're called to, that we can focus on getting things done quickly, expeditiously, and fairly. The situation that we're in now demands action on a whole host of fronts. In addition to the bills on affordability, there's a number of bills that are in front of the House, and maybe it's useful for me to take a moment to capture some of the bills that are in front of us that will also be priorities over the coming 11 weeks, starting with Bill C-21. This is a bill that's taking action to protect our communities from the dangers of firearms. We're going to be freezing the market on handguns. We're going to attack smuggling at the border and implement red flag provisions to address domestic violence. Avec le projet de loi 18, nous faisons en sorte que les médias et les journalistes d'information numérique canadiens reçoivent une juste compensation pour leur travail. Le projet de loi C-22 a été présenté pour réduire la pauvreté chez les personnes handicapées au Canada. Il s'inscrit dans le cadre de notre programme plus vaste, qui a déjà permis de sortir près de 100 000 Canadiens de la pauvreté. Grâce au projet de loi 13, nous allons améliorer la loi sur la langue officielle afin de remédier au déclin du français au Canada. Et grâce au projet de loi S5, nous allons moderniser la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement pour la première fois en 20 ans. Cette loi est la pierre angulaire de la protection de l'environnement au Canada. De plus, nous sommes déterminés à faire avancer l'adoption du projet de loi C-29, qui établit un Conseil national de la réconciliation. Il s'agit d'un des appels à l'action de la Commission de vérité et de réconciliation. C'est la bonne chose à faire. Et nous demandons aux autres parties d'adopter le projet de loi. So there's a great number of important initiatives that we think are essential to take action on behalf of Canadians, and we look forward to working with the other parties and finding a legislative path forward. I'm going to speak for a moment on hybrid. We had a extraordinarily historic time where the business of not just this place, but all Canadians was incredibly disrupted by the trauma, really, of COVID. And it meant that we all had to adjust how we did work. And we are now taking an opportunity as Parliament to reflect on what worked and what didn't work in that process. At the end of the last Parliament, we put the matter before the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. It is my understanding that the committee will be dealing with that forthwith to take a look at what provisions can be used going forward. But make no question about it, just as you saw in the end of the last session, as we hopefully return to some sense of normality and we begin to move through what I hope is the ending phases of this pandemic, that all of the normal functions of Parliament will continue. Asking questions in question period, committees operating, members making speeches, that all of the normal business of the House will continue, and PROC will examine how these measures can be used. My last note is simply one of tone. I've referenced the fact that these are historic times, that we are all called, each of us in this world right now, to rise to the occasion of enormous tumult. We've lived in a world that was a lot more certain in past periods of time. And the tone that I'm going to bring is what I've tried to do from the beginning, to be reasonable, to listen to reasonable approaches, to operate with transparency with the other parties. I have had several conversations with the new opposition House Leader, Andrew Scheer, and it is my hope that we can have a House that respects the minority nature of this place, that each of us have to work together to rise to the occasion of this hour, and it is my hope that I can be worthy of that in the role and responsibility the Prime Minister has given me. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Okay, so we'll start with the questions in the room. Commençons avec les questions dans la salle. Hélène?
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Holland. J'aimerais juste savoir le projet de loi qui est annoncé là, pour mettre en œuvre les mesures anti-inflation. J'imagine que ça va être C30. Est-ce qu'il faut un Ways and Means d'abord qui permettrait de verser tout de suite les chèques ou il va falloir attendre l'adoption du projet de loi pour que l'argent soit versé?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. L'action contre l'inflation, c'est tellement important et c'est essentiel qu'on va adopter le projet de loi aussitôt que possible. Et c'est certain qu'on a beaucoup de conversations avec l'MPD, mais aussi j'ai eu l'occasion de parler avec le Bloc québécois et de présenter l'urgence d'adopter le projet de loi. J'ai pas eu la chance de parler avec les partis conservateurs. J'ai parlé un peu avec M. Scheer sur les questions de la rapidité de l'adoption de le projet de loi. Mais il va y avoir une réunion de leaders avec mes homologues dans l'autre partie cet après-midi. Et j'espère qu'on peut trouver une solution d'adopter le projet de loi aussi rapide que possible. Qu'est-ce que c'est exactement la façon de faire ça? Je dois parler avec des autres partis.
C'est pas...
Non, je comprends, mais c'est possible, mais je dois parler avec dans les réunions après-midi sur ces questions-là.
Et juste sur la question, c'était pas clair dans ma tête. Pour vous, vous voulez poursuivre le gouvernement hybride et vous voyez quel horizon à ça?
C'est pour maintenant. Il va y avoir des témoins à l'extérieur de la Chambre, mais aussi les députés qui vont parler sur l'efficacité que le système hybride. Et alors, avec ça va créer une occasion de considérer la continuation du système hybride. Et je suis certain que je vais parler, je suis disponible de parler cette comité-là. Et à ce moment-là, je vais expliquer mes pensées sur ces questions-là. Mais maintenant, c'est le temps pour le comité de commencer leurs études et d'entendre des autres témoins avant que je vais parler sur ça.
Boris?
Bonjour, M. Holland, Boris Pro du Devoir. Juste pour rebondir sur la question de ma collègue, est-ce que les Canadiens vont devoir attendre que les parlementaires passent le projet de loi avant de recevoir leur premier chèque, oui ou non?
Alors, c'est important pour moi de parler cet après-midi avec mon homologue dans l'autre partie. C'est plus juste de faire ça. Alors, je ne suis pas certain exactement de la réponse maintenant parce que je dois travailler avec des autres parties sur ça.
D'accord. Vous avez mentionné C18, mais vous n'avez pas mentionné les deux autres projets de loi du triptyque, là, haine en ligne et C11. Concernant C11, c'est devant le Sénat. Est-ce que vous êtes prêts, s'il y a des amendements, à un peu de flexibilité pour le modifier un peu? Et sur la haine en ligne, est-ce qu'on va voir ça dans cette session?
Non, c'est une bonne question et je m'excuse. J'ai fait une erreur. C'est pas une liste compréhensive. Il y a des autres projets de loi. C'est juste des exemples des projets de loi mais il y a des autres projets de loi, évidemment, et certainement, on va continuer notre travail avec des autres projets de loi. Et pendant les prochaines 11 semaines, j'imagine qu'il va y avoir des autres projets de loi aussi, mais ce n'est pas une liste compréhensive.
Bonjour, Inès Lombardo de Franco-Presse. Je voulais savoir, vous avez évoqué un ton raisonnable et vous êtes engagé à travailler avec les autres partis, notamment avec le Parti conservateur. Alors, ma question c'est, est-ce que vous avez senti que de l'autre côté, c'était pareil? Est-ce que vous sentez que le Parti conservateur est prêt à travailler avec vous? Et quelle était la teneur, si vous pouvez répondre, de vos discussions avec Andrew Scheer?
Oui, c'est une bonne question. C'est une bonne question pour les partis conservateurs. Pour mon côté, je suis prêt d'agir dans une façon raisonnable, avec une ton respectueuse. Et ça, c'est mon objectif. C'est pas important si l'autre côté est adopté la même approche ou non. Si oui, je pense que ça, c'est tellement bon pour le pays. Ça, c'est le pays à avoir une attente que ça, c'est le cas, je pense, particulièrement dans un temps historique que maintenant. Mais sinon, on va continuer d'agir dans la même façon, même si l'autre côté ne pas agir dans la façon-là.
Vous avez évoqué le projet de loi C13 sur les langues officielles. La ministre Petitpas-Taylor s'attend à ce que ce soit adopté avant Noël. Est-ce que vous avez une échéance par rapport à ça?
Oui, ce n'est pas mon choix nécessairement parce que je dois travailler avec des autres partis, mais c'est absolument une priorité pour nous d'adopter le projet de loi 13. C'est de moderniser notre loi pour les langues officielles. Et ça, c'est mon objectif, d'adopter le projet de loi aussitôt que possible. Mais alors, je dois travailler avec des autres partis et je dois déterminer leur ouverture de continuer rapidement avec le projet de loi-là.
Good morning, Marina von Stackelberg with CBC News. How do you expect the tone to change in the House of Commons with the new Conservative Party leader?
Well, it's a great question. I get that during leaderships, sometimes somebody acts one way and then they pivot. We've seen that before. I would just impress upon the Conservatives that I don't think this is a time for games. This is not a time to try to be clever or use rhetorical tricks or try to pretend things are solutions that aren't. I think Canadians are going to see through that. This is a serious hour that demands us to rise to the occasion with the best of our ability and to offer people all that we have to provide them solutions. So if, there's a continuance of the circus, then, they'll have to see who will buy tickets. But I don't think that's what people want. But I'm not in the Conservative Party. So all I can say is what we're going to do. And what we're going to do every single day is come here to do, to the best of our ability, the work of this nation. And we're going to try to do it. Look, I was an opposition critic. I respect what they have to do. They have to punch us. They have to make us accountable. They have to ask us hard questions. Sometimes I got carried away in that. And there's people in this room who saw me get carried away with that. But this isn't that kind of time. I think that it's a time that is more serious, and I hope that we're all reflecting on that as we start today. C'est évident qu'il y a un choix pour le Parti conservateur aujourd'hui. C'est pendant le chefferie. C'est certaines choses que le nouveau chef du Parti conservateur a fait, mais c'est un temps tellement sérieux aujourd'hui. C'est le temps pour le jeu, le temps pour des choses pas sérieuses, c'est pas maintenant. Et c'est un temps tellement sérieux mondialement, et ça demande tous nos efforts et d'adopter un ton tellement respectueux, et j'espère que ça va être le cas pour le Parti conservateur aussi.
Your government has struggled to pass its gun control legislation. What sort of timeline do you think is reasonable at this point?
I understand that the Conservatives have continued to try to block the legislation that we put forward on responsible gun legislation to protect our communities. Canadians want to see action on these items, and so we're going to be moving, I think, in all quarters as quickly as we can. To adopt, because I think all of the things that we're talking about are representative of priorities for Canadians, and they want to see this move as quickly as possible. There's already been a considerable amount of debate on these items, and so we're hopeful. But I mean, a lot of this will be determined in the House Leaders meeting that will be today and in the subsequent conversations. I don't want to be prejudicial to that. We want to be respectful of the fact that we want rigorous debate to occur in the House, but that Canadians expect action. So we're going to move as quickly as we can on this.
Are you in a position to say when the committee on the firing the infectious disease scientists, when that committee will go on, when that committee will start up and get rolling?
Yeah, so we're in the final stages of the selection of judges. I think we should be in a position to announce those very, very shortly. And once those are determined, then that committee can move forward immediately.
Do you see any possibility of getting the Conservatives on board for this?
I hope so. I hope so. Look, I think that there's a choice for all of us, right? I mean, in the dark corners of the web, there are conspiracies that are flying around. And when you're in a very challenging time globally, there's a great seduction to that which is simple and easy. And if we add kerosene to things that are not true, rather than hold them out to the scrutiny of the sunlight and truth, then we are really creating something that's very dangerous. And I think we're seeing that all over the world. We can't play games with truth. And so we have offered a process. We offered it through one channel, which was NSICOP, and that was rejected. We're offering it through another channel, which is a panel of independent judges who will act as an arbiter to be able to look through information and make sure that any questions and all questions get answered, so that we can purge any doubts that might remain. And I think it's important that all parties participate in that. And if they don't participate in that, then one has to ask the question if they want answers. This is now the third House Leader and the third leader that I'll be posing this question to. And I will be raising it House Leaders, which is whether or not all parties want to participate in that or not.
How far do you expect to advance the consumer privacy legislation by Christmas?
That one, again, I have to defer to a conversation with the other House leaders. I am a bit, because I can talk about these as priorities and the importance of taking action. But in terms of the schedule and the calendar, I mean, we have had a number of conversations, but they've been somewhat stymied by the fact that we didn't know who the leadership of the Conservatives would be until just a couple of days ago. Mr. Scheer has been very available to speak. But we haven't had the opportunity to meet as a group of House leaders to talk about sort of the cadence of the calendar. I have ambitions to pass as much as we possibly can, but I know that other parties are going to want a certain amount of time for the various processes that are going to occur. So I'm just not in a position to answer that at this point.
Has the government made a decision on whether it will accept the Senate's amendment on the electronic border searches bill?
I would refer you to the minister on that. I'm not in a position to answer that at this time.
Next question.
The new Conservative, hi, Jordan Gowling, CTV News. The new Conservative leader has really hammered your government on inflation and the affordability crisis. Apart from the affordability plan that you're presenting today, are you prepared to offer more legislative solutions to affordability and even maybe work with the Conservatives on that?
Well, the first thing I would say is we have legislation that is going to be immediately before this House that we have to adopt, and that is going to make a meaningful impact in allowing Canadians to help pay their bills. And let's adopt that. Let's get that done. Where there are concrete and real proposals, not as Patrick Brown called it, magic internet money. Like when we're dealing with real solutions, if they want to put them forward, of course we're open to that. There have been examples, I think, of very early in Parliament when we were dealing with C3, where the Conservatives came forward with a number of changes and proposals that were very constructive and allowed us to change that bill in a way that I think was very positive. We haven't seen anything brought forward since really C4 from the Conservatives offering any constructive offerings of change. There's a lot of criticism, but there doesn't seem to be any ideas. There doesn't seem to be any offers on the table to do anything concrete or real. But I think we've demonstrated when they put concrete, real things on the table that we're willing to discuss them, and where they're reasonable and they improve the lives of Canadians, absolutely we'll consider them.
My follow-up is just on the Huawei ban bill. Is that a priority going into this fall session? You seem to have a lot of agreement amongst other parties that we need to do this. It's 3 years in the making. What's the timeline on when you can pass that bill?
It's a good question. I'll have more for that after I talk to my counterparts.
Ryan?
Ryan Temple, the National Post. Mr. Singh's going to be up in a few minutes here, and we're going to ask him about the shape of the deal. I'm wondering how you view the shape of the deal. Do you feel like the NDP is cooperating? Do you feel like they're working with you on bills and committees and some of the commitments they made?
So with respect to the supply and confidence agreement, I think that it's worked very well. I've not just with my counterpart, Mr. Julian, but with all MPs in the NDP caucus. Hasn't always been easy. Rightfully, we have major points of disagreement, but I think there's been very constructive conversations on the areas that were outlined in that supply and confidence agreement. We're seeing good progress made on dental care. We're seeing good progress made on a number of items, other items that they have identified as priorities. I think we're finding a good rhythm in understanding that while we disagree, and many times disagree quite vociferously, that doesn't stop us from trying to find ways to work to common purpose. And frankly, it's an attitude that I'm attempting to apply across Parliament to work with other parties as well. There have been moments where I've seen that level of cooperation present in other parties as well. And it's something that I want to further. Again, as I said, not to belabor the point, but in a minority government, I think that's what people's expectations are. And I think that that's what people's expectations are when we're facing significant global headwinds.
And then in the spring budget, there was a lot of items like the growth strategy and the growth fund that promised details to follow in the fall. Are you anticipating and making room for legislation to implement those details?
Well, what I said in my comments is that we've got a small amount of time to get an enormous amount done, and I've given you a little bit of a taste of what some of that is. But certainly there is going to be additional things generally that we have to consider. The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance have laid out the most immediate steps that we have to take, and I think it's essential that we adopt those. That we have to be iterative, and that we have to be flexible. But there is really essential legislation that's in front of us right now that we need to adopt.
Good morning, Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. For the last couple of years, obviously, hybrid parliament has been a big part of the daily operations here. I'm wondering if you could talk about how you anticipate hybrid parliament working at all in the coming session.
Yeah, I think, first of all, let me just take a step back and thank the House administration for the incredible work that they did to set up the systems that allowed us to work remotely during the pandemic. It's really quite remarkable that Parliament was able to make the shift that it did so that it could continue to function and serve Canadians throughout the darkest hours of the pandemic. And there's a lot of learning that came from that. I have a lot of personal reflections on that. But as I said earlier, I think it's important for the committee, for PROC, to take the opportunity to hear from witnesses and to study what worked and what didn't work. Before I get into a position of proclaiming myself what my particular feelings are, because that work is important, and there is in tangent with that the internal dialogue that's happening with all parties. And I have many members from all parties coming up to me and giving their thoughts and their sharing what has and hasn't worked. Those are important conversations, and I think that these conversations need to be led that way. I suspect at some point in time that I would be asked to speak before that committee. At that time, after hearing all of that evidence, I'll be prepared to give my feelings and certainly the feelings of the government upon reflection of that process. But for right now, I think it's important that PROC do its work.
And in terms of other rules, I mean, today there's no masks required. That's a change from the spring. Obviously, vaccine rules have changed. This week, the United States president suggested the pandemic is over from his perspective. Is this a sign that you think that your government also believes the pandemic is over?
I don't know about you, but when I'm going out into the world with some trepidation, I'm noticing that things are improving, that there are that is still a difficult and precarious situation. We still, very sadly, have a lot of people who are dying and getting very ill from COVID-19. We still have the effects of long COVID. We're trying to find a way to live with this and to adapt. It's something that nobody saw coming, and the effects of which have been very traumatic. I do think we need to talk about it in those terms. Having spent the summer going out and talking with people, and as you sort of have a resumption of some kind of normalcy in your life, you see just how much everybody was affected by this. And, I think we're all going into every environment that we're in, wondering how it's going to evolve and being kind of thrown off by the history of everything that's been happening. So we have to take this a cautious step at a time, following the science and evidence, and doing our utmost to keep people safe. And I think Canadians did a remarkable job. We had one of the lowest death rates in the world. If you compare our death rates to other nations, they're exceptionally low. And that Canadians took care of each other. They looked out for their neighbors. They found ways to lift one another up. And really, it was, as hard a time as it was a remarkable time in that. So we don't know where it's going to go. I'm hopeful, but not clairvoyant. And, I don't have the ability to see the future. I just have the ability to analyze facts in real time and try to make the most appropriate decision. And that's what we're trying to do here today and every day with respect to the pandemic and other issues.
Oui, bonjour, Pascal Vachon pour TFO. Je parlais de peut-être garder le Parlement hybride pour le moment, du moins avec la crise des interprètes accrédités du Parlement. Là, il y en a beaucoup qui signalent qu'ils ont des problèmes de santé, des trucs comme ça. Il y en a, là, le Bureau de la traduction doit aller chercher des gens qui ne sont pas accrédités. que vous trouvez que c'est peut-être pas le temps de mettre fin à ce Parlement-là? Parce que ça a été dit là, que la pandémie a fait exploser les problèmes de ce côté des interprètes. Ça serait pas le moment, là, avec cette crise-là, de peut-être dire non au Parlement hybride pour les prochains mois?
Oui, c'était un problème avant la pandémie. Il y avait une crise avec l'interprétation et c'est absolument essentiel que l'interprétation est disponible et pour toutes les réunions et tous les aspects parlementaires. Mais avant la pandémie, il y avait beaucoup de réunions où il n'y a aucune traduction qui était disponible. Pas de tout. Et alors, c'est certain qu'on doit être plus flexible avec les solutions parce que c'est maintenant, il y a, je pense, 31 comités de parlement. Et à l'extérieur de ça, il y a des caucus nationaux, régionaux, et le sous-caucus et aussi les caucus pour des enjeux spécifiques. Et la traduction n'était pas là, pas de tout. Pas de tout. Et alors, c'est certain que on doit maintenir le même niveau de qualité. C'était pour le régie interne, c'était l'objectif. Mais il y a un projet pilote d'essayer d'ajouter à notre équipe de personnes qui peuvent traduire les interprètes, d'avoir une équipe à l'extérieur de ça pour les situations où il n'y a aucune traduction qui est disponible, pas du tout. Et alors, c'est juste un projet pilote et on peut regarder la qualité, on peut regarder si ça fonctionne bien, d'ajouter notre service. Et pendant les prochains 6 mois, ça va être évident que si ça c'est une solution. Et j'espère que ça c'est le cas parce que c'est essentiel d'avoir la traduction.
Sur un autre sujet, vous avez parlé que vous êtes prêt à travailler avec M. Scheer et avec l'opposition conservatrice. Est-ce que votre patience va avoir une certaine limite concernant qu'on a peut-être un style peut-être plus, je dirais, différent avec M. Poilievre? Est-ce que votre patience va avoir peut-être une limite plus que c'était le cas par le passé concernant le travail avec l'opposition?
M. Scheer a été le président de la Chambre et je n'ai pas eu la chance de travailler avec M. Scheer pendant cette période-là parce que j'ai pris une petite pause dans ma carrière de politique. Mais à l'extérieur de ça, M. Scheer et moi avons été élus pendant la même année. Et il est quelqu'un qui, on a de grandes différences politiquement, mais il est quelqu'un raisonnable de temps en temps, j'espère. Et alors, j'espère qu'il va y avoir une bonne relation et une bonne opportunité de travailler avec M. Scheer et de trouver une ton respectueuse et positive.
Bonjour, Valérie Bain de Radio-Canada. D'entrée de jeu, je vous demande si vous pouvez répondre aux questions en français et en anglais. Pourquoi avoir décidé de faire des projets de loi différents pour la TPS, le plan dentaire et le loyer?
Pourquoi il y a des...
Plutôt qu'un projet, pour un projet omnibus, par exemple.
Oui, mais ce n'est pas nécessairement le cas. Dans quelques moments, on va présenter des projets de loi, comme tu as déjà expliqué, mais ce n'est pas nécessairement le cas qu'il va y avoir 3 projets de loi. C'est pas pour moi maintenant, c'est parce que c'est dans les prochaines heures ou 2 heures, ça va être évident et je peux répondre plus clairement après ça. Mais c'est pas nécessairement le cas qu'il y a 3 projets de loi individuellement. Il y a des 3 aspects individuels, mais c'est pas nécessairement le cas qu'il va y avoir 3 projets de loi nécessairement.
En anglais, s'il vous plaît.
So yes, in the next couple of hours, we're going to be presenting our action that the Prime Minister was talking about with respect to affordability. It is true that there are 3 very distinct elements to that. You're correct to identify that, but it's not necessarily the case that will be 3 individual bills, but that will become evident in the next couple of hours. Thank you so much.